Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars book review. This one's going to be Star Wars The High Republic Into the Dark by Claudia Gray. So what this is the first YA novel from Star Wars The High Republic. It is, at least in terms of the reviews that I've done, it is the third of the three opening books of The High Republic. So I started off with the middle grade book, A Test of Courage. I then reviewed the first proper novel, Light of the Jedi, and here we are with the first YA Into the Dark. This is an interesting one in that this book is the one that I suppose most closely resembles a more typical Star Wars novel in terms of so they find something, they go somewhere, things happen, and there's a sort of resolution to everything that more or less happens in this book by the end. It's still part of this, initial introduction into the era in that the three books are all sort of interconnected in a way. Obviously, Light of the Jedi is sort of the central point that you sort of need to be somewhat familiar with, that the other books only sort of refer to. In that one of the major events, again, full spoilers for these books, just so we're clear here. It'd be too complicated for me to try and do this review by having separate spoilers for everything individually. One of the key connecting points actually across these books is actually the death of Jorah Mali, which actually happens in Light of the Jedi. Jorah Mali is the main character in this book, Reath Silas's master. So he experiences that over the course of this book, and it gives you a sense for like, okay, so that event in Light of the Jedi happens at roughly the midway point in this book, and then we know that these two books, effectively the reason that these two groups of characters are stranded where they're stranded is because of the hyperspace disaster, which again we see in Light of the Jedi. So Test of Courage was a very light adventure where it was more of a showcase, a character showcase for Vernestra and setting up what she's going to be doing going forward. The actual plot and villains and enemies and stuff like that wasn't too complicated, but it was decent. I enjoyed it for what it was. This is much more like what you'd expect from that style of a book, in that in this case Reath is heading off with a bunch of other Jedi to get to Starlight Beacon. But then that's when the hyperspace disaster happens. So they're caught sort of out in the middle of just like random space because they have to come out of hyperspace. And so they come across this space station, this old space station that no one's been around in years, basically. No one's even familiar with it particularly. It's referred to over the course of this book as the Amaxine Station. Not because that's the name of it, but because the species known as the Amaxine from the past, ancient warrior race, they created this. They were known to have really high technology. So this is where the majority of the book takes place. The general plot of the book is basically Reath and the other Jedi are sent out to Starlight Beacon. The hyperspace disaster happens. They have to, the most recent place they find to sort of, be somewhat safe is the Amaxine Station. Stuff happens. They connect with the rest of the galaxy as the disaster sort of, runs its course. They then, go their separate ways. So Reath is able to return to the Jedi Order and stuff like that. The crew of the vessel are able to return to the Guild and so on. But certain reveals happen when they're sort of back in the real world. That means they have to then come back together and go back to the station to fix some of the problems, some of the sort of mistakes that were made the first time they were there. Because obviously there's some mystery surrounding this station, so there's a need to return to it. So I'm going to try to cover the general kind of plot threads over the course of this. So main character is Reath Silas. He is a Jedi Padawan of Jorah Mali. Another one of the characters in the book is Des Rydan, who was Jorah Mali's previous Padawan. He is now a knight. The general character dynamic here is that Reath does not like adventure and is more scholarly, just excels at the sort of more school aspect of being part of the Jedi Order. Des is like the opposite, where he craves adventure, wants to go out on all these missions, isn't the biggest fan of the sort of more learning side of history and so on. So there's a big contrast there, and basically there's this idea that Reith has to learn to kind of excel at adventure because he is quite skilled, and that's the thing in this era, is that a lot of the Jedi are very skilled, even if not a lot of the situations they end up coming across require such super high skill. But I liked Reith over the course of this book in terms of, because he is a little bit more of a bookworm style character, he's not used to a lot of the action-packed situations that he's put in, but he ends up sort of surprising himself with how good he is at them. And then a lot of the skills, the extra credit courses that he's done at the temple, end up coming in handy because, surprisingly, a lot of the Padawans are more up to date with a lot of these like extra skills that the Jedi learn compared to the Masters. So that's really well done. And over the course of the book, you of course have him, on this mission. He ends up kind of enjoying himself, but obviously being very cautious along the way. When they go back to the Jedi, this is where, of course, he finds out about the death of his master, and this really, really does affect him. But the mistake that he has to return to the station about is that two of the people they end up sort of encountering and picking up before they get to the station are Nan and Haig, who seem to be just these nice two people. This young girl Nan and her kind of guardian Haig, an older guy. And they just seemed like they were trapped in the hyperspace disaster as well, so let's all team up and go onto the station. It's revealed afterwards that the information about the Nihil connects perfectly with Nan and Haig. A lot of like the markings and stuff like that, their ship specifically, it confirms. Reith is convinced Nan and Haig were Nihil, and he's convinced that he's kind of let them in on a few too many things. He kind of, you roughly get the idea, he kind of had a bit of a crush on Nan, or Nan realized she could get more information out of Reith, and so, turned on the charm a little bit with him. There's no particular suggestion that there's like a romance forming necessarily, just that he maybe gave away just a little bit too much information, got a little bit too friendly with her, but that they were somewhat close. They sort of became friends a little bit, and it's a bit of a dynamic. So he wants to go back there to just address what was going on, and then also, because the Nihil were on the station, it suggests that the station was up to, there's something else going on at the station. So he wants to go back to investigate that as well, because one of the key big things that happens when they're in the station for the first time is that Des Rydan is apparently killed. He comes across some technology, and in seconds he's like separated from Reith, and just he's not there anymore. And the only way they can connect the technology to what happened is that he had to have been like basically incinerated immediately, down to the atom basically. This super high energy cell that he stepped on must have just incinerated him. That's the only explanation that they can have for this. And so he's kind of like, did that happen or not? Because he finds Nan at one point like looking through the area where Des was apparently killed. What was the Nihil interested in? So that's why he wants to go back. The other two Jedi that Reith is with are Orla Jareni and Comac Vitus. Orla Jareni is a Jedi wayfinder, which means she has sort of separated her from the kind of council in a way, in that she plans to basically travel on her own as a solo Jedi and sort of follow her own rules to a degree. So she doesn't follow orders directly from the council and is sort of free to, act on her own. It's a pretty cool character arc that they have here, where they address like with her past and with her master that like her master had a very different view on the Force than she did. Her master was sort of more gentle and more like sort of restrictive in a way, whereas Orla was more kind of go with the flow, follow her instincts. That's how she viewed the Force, and she kind of also got shut down quite a lot whenever she would let the Force sort of take control of her and go with the flow. And this is her opportunity to finally, I suppose, use the Force in the way she wants to by going her own way with things. Comac Vitus is the sort of, I suppose, leader of the Jedi on this mission. He's the master. He's basically from the same sort of class as Orla Jareni in that they've known each other forever. The flashback sequences in this book relate to a mission Orla Comac and their masters went on when they were younger, like 25 years ago, where, again, a kind of tragic incident happened. The backstory obviously covers both of their arcs. I don't think it's the strongest part of the book necessarily, in that it's rather light in terms of like Orla, Comac. They're not the strongest characters, I think, coming out of this. This is where like we definitely need more books just with all of the characters to develop this stuff more. But I thought they were reasonably well done overall across the book. Like Orla was very fun because she's able to really interact and get on well with everyone. Comac's a little bit more serious, but you can see the potential for like, wow, like he's kind of similar to Reith in a way because he's a kind of folklore expert and is really into that side of things. The main dynamic they go for with Comac is that he reacts quite poorly when Dez is thought to be killed, and it reminds him of the mission from the flashbacks where his master was killed on this mission, and how the Jedi sort of react to deaths on missions, deaths of their comrades, and that there really isn't a sense of mourning. It's just you accept that they're one with the Force now, they're better, and you move on. You could tell he is hurt still from the past, and even more hurt now that that's happened. They've lost someone on this mission, and so Orla and Comac are both dealing with sort of different things they don't quite like about the Jedi. Orla with sort of maybe some of the restrictive training, not allowing the Jedi to be free, the training not maybe adapting to the way each individual uses the Force themselves, and Comac very much pushing back against the kind of more emotional restraint required from a lot of Jedi. So that works out kind of pretty well. The thing they have to deal with is that they make the decision of the course of the mission, that they find these idols that are there, kind of artifacts, Force artifacts, that they feel are storing the dark side in them. So they feel they need to take these off the station and like purify them later on. And they later, when they get off the station, realize back at the temple that actually the way these things work is not that they sort of they store the darkness within them, but more they create like a barrier to hold something back, so that they were on the station in that location for a reason, holding something back. We actually need to return these to the station. So that means like Reith wants to go back for his reasons, Orla and Comac want to go back for their reasons, and even the crew of the vessel want to go back for their own reasons. So briefly, let's get into them. So the crew of the vessel is Leox Jassy, Affy Hollow, and Geode. Geode, you've probably heard a little bit about this recently. He is the character who is literally a slab of rock. They do explain it's a specific species, it's a sentient species, the Force flows through him just as much as anyone. And with Geode, they just play on the idea of that to everyone who doesn't know him, he is literally just a slab of rock. What's he doing in the navigator's spot on the ship? Can he actually talk, move, or anything like that? But Leox and Affy, who apparently know him quite well, talk about him as if he does all this crazy stuff, that he's a wild man actually, and he gets quite emotional about things, and all of this stuff. He's an amazing navigator. And it's just this joke that like he's a slab of rock. But then there are moments in the book where they just like have something happen where clearly he was the only one on the ship at the time. He was the only one who could have moved the ship. He's such a good navigator. He's the only one who could have done this. By the end of the book, he helps Orla to find a ship so she can do her wayfaring and so on. So I thought it was quite fun. I can see why people are maybe a little bit upset about it being like too much of a maybe jokey character and maybe not being fleshed out enough, but I thought it was fine. Affy Hollow is our other sort of YA character here on the book. She's sort of like the main character of the vessel crew. She is the adopted daughter of Scover Bine, who is the leader of the Bine Guild, which is what the vessel like works for. They're like a transportation company, basically. You learn over the course of the book basically that Scover Bine, it initially comes across as being a completely kind of upstanding company, but actually it does have a little bit of a dark underbelly to it. So Affy has to learn about her adoptive mother that she's not as like perfect as she thought she was, and that she makes some of the pilots that work for her do some pretty terrible things, including what she discovers on the station is that her parents basically died because they were effectively borderline like enslaved to the Bind Guild, and the only way to get out was by performing this very risky mission, which they were killed during. And so this really affects Affy's view on her mother. And the big question is, does she just go along with this, knowing that she's now the heir to the Bind Guild, or does she like turn them in and, you know, basically betray her new mother? So she wants to go back to the station to basically find out more about what exactly happened to like her parents, what exactly Scover's been asking people to do. Leox is the captain of the ship. He's kind of obviously an adult. He's like Affy's kind of best friend in all of this, and he's a pretty cool character. He's got a very kind of chill, relaxed style. They established that like he uses spice and stuff like that, so he comes across like he's sort of like high on drugs a lot of the time. But he's got this sort of surprising wisdom. It's a little bit like, you know, Chong from Avatar, but a little bit more reasonable, I suppose. And there's a fun dynamic here. You know, basically what they go for is that she kind of comes to realize in a way that Leox is kind of more of a, you know, parental figure than her actual adoptive mother is. And it's an interesting situation because Scover is a good mother to her, but she's very dismissive around Affy when Affy maybe calls her out on maybe some of the bad stuff the Bind Guild is doing. So it's a big decision by the end of the book when she makes her decision. But we'll get there. So we end up going back to the station. We all the team meets up again. The Jedi plus the vessel crew, they go back, and when we get there, they find out that okay, what they've released is effectively the Dregnir. Reith investigates. He ends up being not killed by the same machinery, but actually transported by a hyperspace relay to a new location. So it's revealed that one of the main new technologies on the Amaxian station is that it's got these hyperspace pods that are effectively one-to-one locations. Like you can't really change the location. It's just, it hyperspaces you from here directly to here through a kind of pod-like system. That's what Des disappeared on, and it's the same thing that Reith goes through. They meet the Dregnir as the Dregnir also attack the Amaxian station. The Dregnir are this race of sentient plants. They're a warlike species. They have sort of a hive mind type thing going on. They were the ones who like wiped out the Amaxian race in the past, and the only way that they were stopped from potentially taking over a lot of the galaxy was actually by the Sith. The Sith, they talk about this themselves of like, oh, when they see Jedi lightsabers, they're like, the ones with the red ones of those things, they were the ones who stopped us, basically. So that's one of the coolest reveals from the book, is that, oh, the Sith were the ones who actually stopped the Drengir from attacking. Can we hear about that some more? Because I really want to know about the Sith during this era and before. So there's, at this point, like a lot of action is taking place and so on. Reith is forced to sort of fight Des because Des is poisoned by the Drengir to attack him. But eventually Reith is able to sort of break through and save Des and kind of bring him back to everyone else. And, you know, they make their big escape from the place just barely, is effectively what happens here. You know, during everything happening, you have like the confrontation between Reith and Nan again, where she kind of reveals her true self, that she's loyal to the Nihil and so on. But interestingly, because he saved her life earlier on in the book, when one of the other kind of groups of people tried to kidnap her, she reveals here, I suppose, that like she wasn't just acting during that like he really did save her from being kidnapped. So she returns the favor by not killing him when she gets the drop on him. And ultimately, they kind of just go their separate ways, and there's this sort of sense for like, I'm not really sure what to make of this. Like, are these two going to encounter each other again? How much was I actually meant to read into their relationship, if there really was that much of a relationship? But it was kind of interesting. Obviously, Nan's kind of guardian, Haig, dies in the middle of this, so by the end of the book she actually reports to Marchion Ro and kind of like she wants revenge. So that's a big thing in all of this. So Yeah, we've got the Drengir sort of in play because they're also covered in the comics. I think the plot revolves around them a little bit, but by the end, what ends up happening is that everyone makes it out. Dez is going to be okay, but he's going to need some time to recover. His connection to the forests and so on has been damaged a little bit. Wreath asks Comac to be his new master, and ultimately Comac accepts. I think this makes sense. They're actually quite a decent fit for each other, and they got on quite well over the course of the mission. Makes sense. Orla buys a ship and is going to go ahead as a solo Jedi, being a wayfinder. Very cool. Affy turns in her mother, the whole Bind Guild, so it sort of gets shut down, but she's allowed to keep the vessel. She makes, of course, Leox remain on as the captain, and she's going to have, the fun times she's been having on the vessel going forward, but I suppose doing things more the right way. And Geode is going to be his usual enigmatic self going forward. So that's roughly how the book kind of comes to a close. Again, there's a whole plot that relates to the backstory that's more or less about like this very important mission where they save two representatives of two planets that were essential to like a major peace treaty taking place, and that the result of that mission was that the two planets became quite close, and the relationship was good in the aftermath. Overall, I enjoyed it. Like I said, I think towards the start, I'm still waiting for the big thing from the High Republic. I'm waiting for the plot to really properly kick into gear. I think there's potential. The stuff from Light of the Jedi with Marchion Ro and what is the kind of details behind the paths could be very interesting, but I'm a little bit worried that unless they go into a plot that is about the Sith of this era, that they're maybe not going to have as many people's attention as otherwise, because unfortunately, I didn't find the Drengir that interesting outside of the Sith connection, but the hyperspace stuff and especially the station, the technology was actually quite cool. Now, in the middle of all the action, the hyperspace pods get basically destroyed, so the tactical use of this station as like a relay is taken out by the end of this book. So that's that, and ultimately the main takeaways. I want to see more of Wreath Silas. A lot of the characters in this book I wouldn't mind seeing more of again. And I think we are going to see a lot of these characters, because I think the follow-up to this, Out of the Shadows, is going to feature Wreath, but also Vernestra, and I think Affy and the crew of the vessel. I'm not really sure about that, though. I'd have to look into it a little bit more. But if they do a good follow-up like that, combining, say, a character who only got to shine in the middle grade book, in the big book, that's really cool to me. But yeah, they're my thoughts on Star Wars Into the Dark. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts were, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.